Expert panel has found that police and intelligence officials failed to protect lives and property during the deadly July unrest in 2021. President Cyril Ramaphosa authorized the release of the report, which was probing government's response to the looting that cost lives and damaged infrastructure. The panel, led by Professor Sandy Afrika, Advocate Mujanku Gumbi, and Salumko Sokupa, found that dysfunctional relationships between ministers and top officials in their departments impeded synergy in the flow of intelligence, affecting decision-making. The State Security Agency has been under fire for failing to provide intelligence report leading up to the July unrest. For more reaction on this and some analysis to the report, I'm joined by Good Party Secretary General Brett Heron, DA Leader John Steenhuisen, and Program Manager at the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum, Themba Masuku. To be a part of this conversation tonight, you can send us your questions and comments to 072-110-5584. What led to the lackluster performance of our security services? That's the question we're asking tonight. You can tweet us otherwise at Newzroom 405. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. John, let me begin with you. I mean, if you read the report in its current summary, at least that I looked at, not in so much detail, you get a sense that national intelligence estimates predicted, right, a heightened instability in 2021, but there seemed to have been no strategic planning from the key government departments to respond to this. Why?
Well, I think the report, in all 154 pages of it, lays it out in very clear detail that you've got a South African police service that's under-equipped, under-trained, under-resourced to be able to provide any public order policing. You've got an intelligence service in South Africa that has been systematically broken down through abuse for internal political party benefits within the governing party. And the other thing the report puts out very, very clearly is the factionalism that's broken out within the ruling party that has led to a lot of the instability. I think that the intelligence services have been in a great deal of trouble for a long, long time, and they are well overdue for an overhaul, particularly in terms of their structure, but also the oversight mechanisms of them. I think it's a big mistake that they've been moved into the presidency. I think it's going to be a lot harder to develop and entrench their credibility as an independent intelligence gathering source in South Africa while they remain in the presidency. And the sooner that the 2018 recommendations of the Mufamadi high-level panel are implemented, I think the sooner we're going to be able to get a state security apparatus that is purpose-designed to achieve what we need. At every single turn when we've needed intelligence services to brief South Africa, whether it was the burning of schools in Vuyani, whether it was the arson attacks on a number of pieces of our public infrastructure, or whether it was the July unrest, it wasn't done. Now, let me tell you that socialists, liberals, conservatives, all agree on one thing, and that is the state's role and the monopoly that the state has on keeping people safe and maintaining law and order. And a functioning intelligence service, I'm afraid, is important for that, and it is completely lacking. So the president's got to move with speed now. The Mufamadi high-level panel report made excellent recommendations. It's sad that it was released in 2018. We're sitting now in 2022 with very little movement on it, and our intelligence services are going to remain compromised and unaccountable as long as this situation continues. And allied with a police service that's under-resourced, under-trained, under-equipped, undermanned to be able to, particularly in the public order policing units, it's a toxic mix. And unfortunately, what happened in July last year could very easily play itself out again if urgent interventions are not made on those two critical areas.
But Masuku, I mean, what is particularly frightening for me as a citizen is that, as John puts it, the president has been aware of this since 2018, and I'm sure if he's been aware of this, there are other senior leaders within crime intelligence who've been aware of this. Certainly, the police commissioner, through his testimony, says their inability to act was by and large because they are under-resourced, and only those who know that the police lack capacity would have known how to stretch them beyond their capacity. So there are various parts of government that know about these inefficiencies, but nothing has been done up until this point. Is this just a fact of authorities neglecting their role to lead in this particular matter, or are there other considerations and limitations that are leading to this?
Good evening, Thabo, and thank you very much for having us. The issue of knowledge of the weaknesses in the security services are well known. You'd remember that post-Marikana, we were appointed by cabinet to in the panel of experts to actually look very closely at what was happening in public order policing. If you look at that report that we produced and look at this report that is being produced by this other panel, it's exactly the issues are extremely the same. So when you talk about weaknesses in the South African police services, are well documented. The issue of leadership is an issue that we raised in our report, and it's an issue that is repeated constantly in this report. For the SAPS or for any security service to function properly, you need leadership that is well equipped to provide strategic direction, particularly in times of where leadership is required, like during July unrest. The absence of leadership was very evident. So in that regard, the president would have known about the issue because it was an issue that was raised. It's an issue that is raised in our panel report.
Yeah.
The issue of coordination is another issue that is very important. You have so many structures that are well positioned to have the required information at their disposal, but without proper coordination, that can never be effectively implemented on the ground. It was apparent in the July insurrection that whether there was information or no information, the strategic approach in terms of how security forces were going to be deployed was going to be problematic because of that lack of coordination.
Yeah.
But also this is compounded by problems in the leadership, where you have a minister and a national commissioner who don't seem to be operating from the same hymn book. That's problematic because that's very, very strategic. So in other words, you would have to harmonize properly the issues of leadership for you to have a properly coordinated approach, particularly in times of crisis.
Yeah.
So the issue of, you raised the issue of public order policing, which was actually the only issue that our panel of experts was focused on. We make a number of recommendations which are repeated in this report. The July insurrections were typically public order of nature because people came in mass, people were organized or disorganized, but then you needed a response, a capability within the South African police services to properly deploy and to properly have the right equipment. In many places, we saw station-level police officers with absolutely no clue what was going on or how they needed to respond. So you need a capability, and part of the recommendations that we make, of the 180,000 police officers, in the majority, those police officers are station-level police officers in visible policing. Part of the recommendation that we make is that because public order is such of a specialized nature, you would need to at least provide visible police members some capability, some training, so that when things like this happen, when there's public disorder,
yes,
they have the equipment and they've got the capability to neutralize the situation.
All right, I'm going to come back to that question of equipment and whether is it budget related. The police minister would tell you it is not budget related. In fact, there was sufficient budget, particularly in this instance, to have responded properly. And Brett, I'll take your thoughts, particularly around accountability. What defines the South African environment now is some kind of instigators who justify their actions as political activity. Is there capacity within the current government to deal with those people, because they are pretty much attached to the ruling party as well? All right, we'll get to that in a moment as we ask you the question, what do you think led to the lackluster performance of our security services during the July unrest? The question tonight, what led to the lackluster performance of our security services during the July unrest? What are your thoughts? The report is out now, and what do you make of what this report is revealing about the relationship that is seemingly broken down between the police commissioner as well as the police minister? Not only that, issues that are revealed around other government departments and those within the security and justice cluster in the country of what constitutes our common threat to security at this particular point in time. Let's hear your views on 072-110-5584. We still have Brett Herron, John Steenhuisen, and Themba Masuku with us. Brett, let's come to you. I know you as the good party, you're saying, well, now the report is out. We don't want to be a country of reports. I mean, others cost us billions. Fortunate enough, this one was not as long. It still cost us a lot to be able to put together, but nothing ever happens after these reports. Do we have policy formulations in the country, for example, that are able to hold to account instigators who want to cloak their criminal activity as political activity?
Well, Thabo, I mean, we have laws in this country which are able to hold instigators to account. The failure has been to actually implement those laws and to hold the instigators to account. So what the report really revealed today confirms what many of us have known for a long time, that there has been a hollowing out of state institutions, including the security institutions and the prosecuting institutions. There is we're sitting on a tinderbox in South Africa of socioeconomic conditions which make it possible for partially organized and partially spontaneous events like July to take place, and that there are hidden hands that were certainly part of the events of July last year that were aware of the state's incapacity. Now, we handed over evidence to the Hawks in July and August last year of WhatsApp groups that were, I would say, part of the partially organized part of the events, where it was clear from the dialogue in those WhatsApp groups that there were members on those groups that were aware of the state's capacity shortage. So it corroborates what the report is saying today. And what I think is most alarming, and when we talk about accountability, is that the National Intelligence Coordinating Committee appears to have had its intelligence in anticipation of these events, but was unable to secure the attention of the National Security Council and the ministers who are responsible within that council. So there was a failure to pay attention to some of the intelligence. And I think that's where the president needs to focus accountability in the short term.
Yeah. Where was the NSC? Were they fast asleep? Apparently they've not actually met since 2021. Even then, we're not even sure if they've met after the unrest.
Well, the report reveals that the National Security Council had not met, as the report puts it, for some time before July 2021. And the report indicates that the NICOC or NICOC was generating intelligence about the volatility in the country and the events that were likely to take place in July, but were unable to really secure, as I said, the attention of the ministers who needed to respond to that intelligence and to prepare for it. I mean, the lack of capacity in the policing is also something that needs urgent attention. The fact that the report highlights that 6 senior criminal intelligence officers are currently suspended and were suspended at the time needs to be addressed by the police minister and the national commissioner urgently.
John, at some point there needs to be a work of Parliament. Parliament needs to do something here to hold these ministers who are given intelligence and they do nothing about it accountable. It happened right under our noses. 6 officials in intelligence suspended during a critical time. Whether that was deliberate, whether there was really substance to why they are being suspended, ultimately it found us vulnerable to threat.
Well, absolutely. And I think that section 7.59 on page 140 is the bull point. It says, yes, police failed. Yes, intelligence failed. But I think the bigger point is now what? Because we have a plethora of reports in South Africa. And I'm very glad that Mr. Masuku mentioned the report that was done after Marikana, which made specific recommendations around public order policing and how it should be reconstituted and how it should be equipped to be able to deal with that. Nothing was done with that report. And we've seen report after report, whether it's about the security and fire devices in Parliament, whether it's the Marikana Commission of Inquiry, whether it's this report now, or the Mufamadi High-Level Panel report. The reports are given. There is nothing done with them. And we end up then wondering why later down the line this is the situation. The reality here is it's very clear that within the SAPS, Mr. Bheki Cele has been locked in an internecine war with the National Police Commissioner, and that has absorbed and sucked up a lot of the oxygen that should be focused on the matters of hand, which are keeping South Africans safe in their homes and their workplaces. And it's very clear that that internecine battle was the actual focus of the minister's attention rather than the safety and security of the citizens of our country. But I come back to the point. There has to be a better mechanism of design of an intelligence service and better mechanism of accountability. Part of the reason that intelligence service has been hollowed out so spectacularly and been captured to a degree is that the oversight and accountability model of intelligence services in South Africa don't work. And the Inspector General himself will tell you how he was blocked by the former DG Arthur Fraser from performing his functions. And how poorly designed the system is. So I think the time is right now for us to take the Mufamadi High-Level Panel report and turn our state security apparatus into one that, as I said, is fit for purpose. Yeah. I think it, as I've said, a big mistake to locate it in the presidency. The last time that was done was under P.W. Botha, and it had disastrous consequences. And we need a credible, sustainable, and accountable state security apparatus that is designed.
Sorry, John, let me come in. What are these artificial changes really going to bring for us, right? Because this particular report recommends a deeper dive into the national security strategy. In fact, if you read it, it goes on to say pretty much our strategy is outdated, if you are really being honest, because even where they predicted there would be violence, they couldn't predict, for example, the form of violence that would come out. So essentially they were outwitted by the planners of this unrest. So intelligence collection capacity is rather weak or quite outdated. So when we look at these changes happening there, national security now being put in the presidency, what are those artificial changes really going to do?
Well, they're not going to do anything. And in fact, I think they're going to create a credibility crisis for the state security apparatus. We knew it was abused under Mr. Zuma when he was president. And locating these services now, given the taint and dent to their credibility in the presidency, under a new president, I don't think is going to help with the credibility crisis. I think we need a standalone ministry. I recommended at the time that the president appoint Mr. Mufamadi to oversee that particular process, seeing he got to grips very, very deeply in his high-level panel report. But we need to have a standalone state security agency that's not linked to political office bearers, that's not being abused for inter- and intra-party politics, and is focused on preparing intelligence reports that get heard and are used by the relevant agencies. And that's not going to happen in the current setup, I'm afraid. And as nice as Mr. Gungubele may be, I'm afraid the structure's got to be broken down. It's got to be rebuilt from the ground up, and it's got to have the requisite accountability. This thing of having only one committee that can exercise oversight is not the same model that's used in other modern democracies, exercised over very powerful agencies like MI5, MI6, the FBI, the CIA, is far more sophisticated and far more open and transparent than anything we've ever seen here in South Africa. So I think we've got to use this opportunity now to learn from the mistakes that were made and to start to build something that's actually going to serve the people of South Africa going forward, and that's purpose designed to gather intelligence, to make sure it's listened to, it's processed properly, it's intelligence that has the country's interest at heart, not a narrow partisan political interest at heart, and is then able to allow the security cluster to develop strategies to be able to combat the potential threat that may come from them.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll put the question to Themba Masuku. Did resources constrain and prevent the security services from responding to violence? The minister giving testimony while this panel of experts was investigating said no, there was enough budget, in fact, this time around to respond. The only thing is I'm inundated by requests to use the secret fund, which, of course, we know has been misused based on the high-level report of what happened there at SSA. We'll get the July unrest report under scrutiny tonight as we look closely into what is coming out of there and what recommendations should be put in place. Brett Herron, John Steenhuisen, and Themba Masuku with us tonight. You are part of the conversation on WhatsApp 07211055884 or tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Masuku, as I put it, the minister says no, it's not a budget issue. There was enough budget, particularly this time, to respond to this situation. However, is that people are just preoccupied with the use of the secret fund. I'm just getting inundated with requests to use the secret fund. People don't want the money that is currently available. They want to use that secret fund. What's this preoccupation with the secret fund? Maybe it works better, I suppose, than the current budget.
Well, the problem here is that the police were not aware of the magnitude of the problem that they were going to confront. So without that awareness, even the report says poorly equipped, deployed, poorly trained resulted in the police being overwhelmed. So at the time of this incident happening, even if there was a budget somewhere or lots of money somewhere, it would not have dealt with the problem at hand at the time, because without proper intelligence, it meant that they would not have acquired or planned properly and acquired enough resources to deal with the problem. Remember again, the problem of public order, it's a problem that is entrenched in the SAPS. A part of the frustration about members is that they do not have adequate equipment. I mean, how many water cannons are there in the SAPS? Probably there's one in each province. That's completely inadequate for to have responded to that magnitude of a problem in July. But it's inadequate not only for July insurrections, but it's definitely inadequate for any policing situation that we face in this country. Our police deserve better, they deserve a little bit more. Part of the problem as well is that police have learned that in these kind of situations, previously they were made to use lethal force, for example, like in Marikana and elsewhere. But who face the consequences? It is not police leadership that face consequences. The people that, for example, police officers that use force and killed a member of the public in Johannesburg are facing trial. There are still investigations in Marikana. Police officers are facing trial. So in July, police officers knew that in a public order situation like they were confronted with, they were never going to use firearms to protect property. Because in terms of international law, police officers are prohibited from doing that. So you need equipment. You need a particular capability to deal with situations where property is being threatened. So in this case, police were well informed not to kill their own people, people that were looting and destroying property. So when the minister says there was budget, I am not particularly convinced whether the budget at the time would have averted the situation. What you needed at the point, you needed a situation where police officers already had the capability, which they did not have. We needed capacity at that point, which they did not have. So going forward, we could be looking at revisiting all these reports that we've referenced, because they adequately provide the minister and the government with enough information of exactly what needs to be done.
Legislative framework, Brett, I know you're a lawyer, so it might help us with these things. The panel suggests that something needs to be done about this relationship of the minister and the police commissioner, right? Because apparently that issue with the grabber has really ruined their relationship. They're not communicating about the important things that matter at this particular point in time. And how do you change that setup legally so that, I suppose, one doesn't report to the other or one doesn't appoint the other? What actually is supposed to happen there?
Well, Thaba, I don't know if we need to change the legislation. I think that we have two very senior members of our security cluster, the National Commissioner and the National Minister, who need to demonstrate leadership. So it's not a question, I don't think it's a question of inadequate legislation. I think it's a question of poor leadership in stepping up and putting the needs of South Africans before their internal conflict. If the National Commissioner has breached the law or breached a policy, then the National Police Minister needs to follow the processes to deal with that. But we can't have the impasse and the lack of progress that's been made in policing because of a broken relationship that two leaders are unable to repair. So I don't see that it's a legislative issue. It's a question of leadership, and in a moment of crisis, even that broken relationship was unable. They were unable to overcome it, and that's really a poor reflection on the leadership of our policing. That in that period, even then, the broken relationship prevailed.
Yeah. What is lacking? I mean, from hearing from what Bob Masuki is saying there's obviously something that we actually did not have, even if we had the budget, but there's something that we do not have within our security services that we need to have currently. So the question is, what is it that, or what resources are currently available to the security services to carry out their mandate, and what is missing?
Well, if you read the report, I mean, there's the intelligence community appears to have the resources to do the work, and we're able to generate some of the intelligence required. What was really missing was the implementation or the reaction to that intelligence. Now, the question, you were asking questions about budget. I don't think it's so much a question about budget as a question as are the police and the public order policing in particular adequately resourced when the time comes? If you read the report, there were questions around the procurement processes that had to be followed in order to resource the public order policing, which doesn't make sense to me. If you are properly prepared, you would have had those resources, the equipment on the ready or at the ready, instead of needing to procure them when you are suddenly faced with a crisis. So the question of budget is maybe more a question of how you manage the budget and prepare for these kinds of events so that you have the equipment that is ready to go when your public order policing is needed.
Yeah. So I suppose, I mean, exactly what they're saying, the functioning, for example, of all the role players, the NSC, the JC, PS, and all the players that need to play, needs to be a little bit more proactive. In other words, as you're putting it, be able to determine these things before they occur and acquire the necessary resources.
Well, the resources need to be ready when the events happen, and not start a procurement process when the events happen. So there was the idea that you would start procuring equipment that was needed in order to respond to those kind of events only once those events occurred is quite frankly absurd. I mean, that kind of equipment needs to be available. Temba made reference to it. The report confirms that there's only one water cannon per province. So the ability to manage the scale of the insurrection was severely curtailed by a lack of equipment as well. So lack of preparedness, lack of equipment, the need to bring in water cannons from other provinces. It is a combination of lack of preparation and probably not a budget issue.
Yeah. It gets tiring, John. I mean, we always say this, there's a lack of political will. I don't even know what it means anymore to say there's a lack of political will. But again, it sounds like it's a question of a lack of political will. Why is the relationship between the police minister and the police commissioner not being resolved?
Because they're allowed to continuously get on with this factional infighting within the SAPS and fighting over control. And all the while, the key things that should be occupying their time are being left behind. Now, I was on the ground in July during the unrest in Durban. And I can tell you right now that the rubber bullets had run out on the very first day of the unrest. Now, how on earth do you do public order policing with large crowds with no rubber bullets? They had to fly rubber bullets in from one of the other provinces to be able to get that ready. Now, if your police service was operating with a focus on what it should be doing rather than on who's in which position, who's heading crime intelligence, I'm going to hold this piece of information away from you because it gives me power and makes you look bad, or if I don't do this, the minister will look bad. But I would say there's a greater step here than just political will, and that's political accountability. And I think that's where we're lacking a great deal in this situation and in many others in South Africa. If you look at the trouble that the British Prime Minister's in at the moment for hosting parties during the lockdown, you look at what happened to Mark Rutte's government in the Netherlands, who stood down over relatively minor things. Here we're talking about hundreds of people who have died, over 50 billion rands worth of damage done to the economy. Where is the political accountability? Why is the minister allowed to keep his job in this environment and after such a scathing report? And the reason he can is because we lack the consequence framework in South Africa. And so I think one of the big steps that could be taken is that ministers themselves need to start showing political accountability. If this had been any other democracy in the world, I bet you anything you like that the minister would have stood down. And if he'd not stood down, the president or the head of state would have asked him to step down or done a cabinet reshuffle. But here we see the situation. If you look at the three main protagonists that should be held accountable as a result of the report, the police minister is still in his job. The former state security minister was shuffled off to another portfolio, and the defense minister was promoted to being the Speaker of Parliament. There's no accountability. So there's will, but there's also accountability, and you can't have one without the other, I'm afraid.
Then that conversation around the July unrest report released, made public now by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Interesting revelations coming out of there. I suppose, John, the most scathing for me would have to be that one that you mentioned, that internal contradictions within the ANC are having a huge impact, in fact, a negative impact on governance matters in the country, as much as they might not want to admit that. But this is what this panel is pointing to, and I suppose the politics are going to take over here instead of actually addressing this issue.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely the case. And I think the other important takeaway from the report as well is that the report acknowledges that it is precisely this faction fighting within the governing party that is behind a lot of the unrest and behind a lot of what has happened. But here we're seeing that the fighting within the SAPS had a detrimental impact on the ability of that organization to be able to meet the challenge that it should have met at that particular time. Yeah. And so I think that we've got to, the president's going to have to intervene. Safety and security is a top issue for all South Africans. And I think the president now needs to get in there and knock some heads together. I think get a new minister in place. If he has to replace the national commissioner, do so. But for goodness sake, do something to get the policing system in South Africa working and moving forward, instead of being locked in this internal battle for control and for the heart and soul of the SAPS, because it's tearing that organization apart as the factions start to maneuver against each other and take their eye off the ball and focus on the things they shouldn't be focusing on, as the SAPS.
But the other issue, I suppose, John, that people are going to raise here is what is also raised in this report, that there needs to be a broader social compact around the socio-economic issues, because part of the reason why this ran and became so widespread and out of control and unpredictable was some of it was because people were genuinely in a dire situation and needed some kind of relief economically at that particular point in time. And this is something that we will need to not only pin on the ANC, but also on other parties, civil society, religious organizations, the whole entire lot of the stakeholders coming on board here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that all of the panelists agree that the tinderbox, as the report refers to it as well, which was language we used last year too, is the fact that we live in one of the most unequal societies in the world. We live in an environment of 42% unemployment rate, and an environment where opportunity is very limited for far too many South Africans. So we've got to address that. And yes, that is on all of us. It's on all of us as parliamentarians, councillors, leaders, church leaders, business leaders, civil society leaders. And we've got to get this economy working, growing. We've got to lift people out of poverty and into opportunity. And one of the heartbreaking sections in the report where they detail how some of the business owners said that it was some of their usual friendly customers who were regular customers there who were involved in the rampant looting, and how devastating it was for the business owners to witness that. So I do think we've got to have a compact, and we've got to understand that we've got to do more to deal with poverty. And that's why I get quite frustrated when I see us shipping hundreds of millions of rands to Cuba to deal with food security, when our child malnutrition rate is so much higher here in South Africa than it is in Cuba. Imagine what that money could have done if it had been given to Gift of the Givers, for instance, how much real, genuine relief and poverty relief that money could have engendered. And here we're sending it off to another country. So these are things we've got to grapple with, and we've got to look at them seriously, because I'm afraid that if that social compact is torn asunder anymore, what we saw happening in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng could very easily spread like a wildfire to every single one of the other provinces and to every corner of South Africa.
But Masu, in each and every one of these reports and recommendations, how do we deal with this fraught relationship of the National Police Commissioner and the Police Minister? Because, I mean, by all indication, it seems that relationship can work depending on who is in the office of the minister.
The problem, Tabo, is that we don't have a very good history of national commissioners staying on for a while to see how they actually work with the ministers, because every commissioner has been appointed has left before their term expired. But it's a very strategic position, the position of national commissioner, and is appointed by the president, and both the minister and the national commissioner are presidential appointees. So the issue there is whether the president actually recognizes the situation police are in at the moment, given that the two leaders are not singing from the same hymn book. It's an issue that I don't think it should be left for a very long time, because its consequences have been very clear, and the recommendations here are very clear as well, that unless that is dealt with, and the decision has to be very decisive to strengthen the security apparatus. Without an effective police functioning, we won't have the capability, or police will not have the capability to deal with all forms of insurrection, whether large scale or small scale. So, because you need that leadership to exist. But let me just add another issue, Tabo, here, is that one of the things the report also mentions is that there needs to be an investigation of either people in the intelligence community or in the security, in the police community, those that may have been complicit in fueling insurrections. I think for me that's very important to say to what extent where our both intelligence apparatus and the police compromised, so that then you can't have people working against the state that are employed by the state. So there needs to be an internal thorough investigation of what role, if ever, was played by police officers or intelligence operatives in the July insurrections.
Yeah. Brett, what we are seeing happening in the country is some huge threats to the critical infrastructure in the country. As we speak, the State of the Nation address is happening at City Hall because the parliamentary precinct is uninhabitable at this particular point. In fact, it's probably a danger to those who would want to go there. But that's not only it, but we've been seeing some other threats to other critical key points in the country. How do we optimize the security of our critical infrastructure with what we have right now, really? This is the situation that we are dealing with right now.
Well, I think the starting point would be to implement the Critical Infrastructure Act, which was passed by Parliament, I think in 2019, assented to by and published by the President towards the end of that year, but with a commencement date to be determined. So a good starting point would be to use the legislation that was designed to assist with the protection of critical infrastructure, to clean up the roles and responsibilities around the protection of critical infrastructure. And the role of parliamentarians and in asking questions as to why this act is passed, approved by the President, but the date, but yet to be implemented. I think that's a failure of the legislature to hold the executive to account, and the executive must explain why. What are we waiting for? We have the act. The act strengthens the hands of those in the security cluster around the protection of critical infrastructure, increases penalties for those who sabotage critical infrastructure, but the act hasn't been implemented, and that's, I think, inexplicable and needs to be addressed.
John, and finally, final bite on this one. I see you saying Minister Ayanda and Minister Bheki Cele must be fired. Now, you know what people say about the DA and litigation. Are we likely to see a legal challenge taking this one to the courts?
No, but I certainly think that if the President's going to resolve the matter in the SAPS, as I said earlier, he's going to have to intervene. He can't turn a blind eye to this for a moment longer. He's got a police commissioner at war with a national police minister. And as I said, that they are drawing up into each of their offices a lot of energy, a lot of oxygen, a lot of resources, and a lot of factionalism. And for every day they're fighting and at each other's throats, it's a day that South Africa's security and South African citizen security is compromised. So the President's going to have to get to grips with it. He appoints ministers, he disappoints ministers. I think the court would be very reluctant to remove a minister from office unless, of course, they violated the oath of office. Now, he's got to make a political decision here about accountability and setting the tone in his administration to be able to, when reports like this come out, show that he's given due consideration to them and has acted upon them. And this is not going to join the Farlam Commission report. It's not going to join the Marikana report. It's not going to join any one of the hundreds of reports we've received on a shelf somewhere in the Union building, gathering dust, and there's no consequences. We don't learn from the mistakes. And then when it happens again down the line, we suddenly remember, oh, well, we had this report. Much like the Mufamadi report. All of these failings that are highlighted in this report that's been released now were all dealt with significantly by the Mufamadi high-level panel report. And had those recommendations been implemented then, I think we would have been far further down the line towards ensuring we had a fit-for-purpose state security agency. I think we need to rescue the SAPS from the internal warfare. And when you're losing a war, you've got to change the generals. And I think it's time for him to do that.
Appreciate your time, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming through. Themba Masuku, Brett Heron, and John Steenhuisen.